Yeah, it's very important you understand what, and heard the other thing is, this number has to get to the consumer within 3 business days of making application, so that that consumer is fully aware of what the estimate's going to be for that loan, and thus allow him to shop. So you make application on Monday, you got Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, it has to be in the client's hands. It's 3 days, 3 business days. I remember on my mortgage loan originators test, there was a bunch of questions like that, because sometimes the weekend counts, sometimes it doesn't. With refinancing and that 3-day right of rescission, Saturday counts. On this, Saturday doesn't count. And then the question they loved was Christmas. Oh, well, that's a holiday. That one doesn't count. So Monday counts, Wednesday counts, but Tuesday didn't. The second form is called the closing disclosure. The closing disclosure is the itemized list of that $5,000. So the loan estimate is like the cost that's going to charge you. The closing disclosure is the final document that you get right before you go to closing, and it's going to show you where all the numbers go. If you look in your book on 266 and 267, you can start to see these forms. There's the loan estimate form. They talk about the loan terms, the payoffs, or the payments, the closing, all of the costs. And then over on the closing disclosure on page 269 is the same issue. These documents, these 2 documents now make up for the 4 documents we used to have. There was a truth in lending, and a good faith estimate became the loan estimate. Then we had a truth in lending, and the HUD statement, or the uniform settlement statement, became the closing disclosure. One is the estimate 3 days after application. The other is what they use to close on. All of this came about due to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which also created this thing called Your Home Loan Toolkit on page 274. The home loan toolkit must be provided to the person seeking credit so that they can run some scenarios and understand what all this stuff means. Are we good? RESPA is a real big pain. So is TILA. So let's go on over to page 275 and talk about how the closing statement works. Couple things I want you to know in this. So if you're at home, write this down. If you're here, write this down. The closing is seen as cash. It happens as a cash transaction. Even though you think there's wired money coming in, even though you think there's cashier's checks coming in, it's settled up like cash. Here's a funny one that I guarantee I'll use on you in a little bit. There are only 2 people at the closing, buyers and sellers. That's it. Now, maybe the buyers are multiple people, but what I'm saying is they're still buyers. You'll see how this plays out in a minute when you guys start thinking and you go, oh, I'm going to go. There's only 2 of them in there. Who is it? The day of closing, the house belongs to the seller. On the day of closing, the house belongs to the seller. The easy way to remember that is it only will belong to the buyer if the closing happens. But it darn sure will belong to the seller either way. You'll see how that plays out here when we start prorating stuff. Earnest money is a credit to the buyer, remember? So is the loan amount that the buyer got is also a credit. will show up as a credit. So now they're on 275. Let's go through this. The closing statement is nothing more than an accounting ledger that adds up debits and credits. Debits are things that are owed and have to be paid. Credits are things that have already been paid, or the positive side, okay? Not anymore, it's not. It's now the closing disclosure. It's the same concept as the settlement statement. That's what I'm saying. This new closing disclosure under the new rules took the place of the truth in lending and the uniform settlement statement, or what most people call the HUD. All right? Now, we still use the HUD on some of the deals that aren't covered by TILA. But first lien residential properties for 1 to 4 homes uses the Truth in Lending Act, so you're going to use this new form called the CD, the closing disclosure. The closing disclosure is nothing but a series of debits and credits. So on page 275, let's go through some of these things, and I want you to tell me who's paying and is it a debit or a credit? Now, there are going to be questions on the exam that you're going to go through this math and do this, then you're going to come to me and go, yeah, but if that would have been, then that answer is correct. Answer the question I asked. Don't read into the question and say, well, if they'd have done this, that's not what it said. All right? You'll see what I mean. So, for example, the buyer's commission. Who pays the buyer's commission? The seller does. I think I misspoke. It says realtor's commission, doesn't it? Broker. Yeah, I said buyers. Who pays the broker's commission? The seller does, right? He under the listing agreement, and then that agent pays the other agent. Remember the tree that we split? So the broker's commission is paid for by the seller. Is it a debit or a credit? It would be a debit because he's got to pay it at the closing table. So it would come out of his money because he owes it. See where I'm going? How about an attorney's fee? Attorney's fee, though I love the story, dance with the one who brung you. Whoever brought the attorney pays for the attorney. All right? Now, there is an attorney that is kind of rolled into the title company that reads the deed to make sure. Typically, that attorney's fees may be split 50-50. And it's only $75, $99, $25. That's just for him to read the deed and go, yeah, that's good. But if you bring an attorney because you think the other side's cheating you, you're paying for that attorney. But it's a debit. How about the recording? Both parties have recording expenses. The seller has to record the payoff to show his lien got released. The buyer wants to record because it shows his new equity. The lender wants to record because he's got a new lien. But the one primary thing that gets recorded, what do you think the most important one of them are, believe it or not, even though I've downplayed its importance all through this whole course, the most important one that gets recorded is the deed. Who has the most reason to get that deed recorded? Right. So when they talk about a deed recording, that's a buyer's fee. Because he's the one that wants everybody to know that that property did get transferred. Boop. So while both parties have recording fees in general, the big one or the main one that everybody wants is called the deed recording. That's a buyer's fee. Transfer tax, that's typically a seller. You guys don't really care. We don't use it in Indiana. Title work. Both parties. Remember, there are two sides to the title. We talked about it. There is an owner's policy and a lender's policy. And that day I told you, seller to pay owner's policy, buyer to pay lender's policy. So it's a debit. They both owe it. And it's both sides of the table. Loan. Who pays the loan fees? Duh. The buyer. Insurance reserve or escrow accounts? Buyer. Appraisal? Buyer. Survey? Buyer. All those deal with the loan. And then there's a whole bunch of other stuff that can be negotiated, like upfront mortgage insurance. That's one. PMI. There are fees that go to the VA. There's other kinds of stuff. But more importantly, there are some stuff that has to get prorated because it's based on usage. Proration is the division of a product because it has to be used. What I want to do is, this is going to be a long one, so I'm going to stop the audio and go to the next one.